Hello and welcome to Better Under Pressure. I'm Sara Milne Rowe, author of The Shed Method and founder of Coaching Impact. And in this podcast, I talk to leaders from all walks of life about being better under pressure and using pressure for better. I want to explore how we handle pressure in a world that is becoming more and more complex, the impact that pressure has on our ability to perform at our best, and what we do to be better under pressure.
So I was very, very lucky to chance upon the Marines to somehow find the ability or the strength as a timid but shy person when I joined to stay the course. And through staying the course to actually feel like I was getting more confident. With that confidence came, I think, an inner strength and a completely new relationship with what we're calling in this podcast pressure.
Welcome to Season 2 of Better Under Pressure. I'm very excited to be kicking it off today and in the company of none other than my business partner, Simon Scott. Formerly a Royal Marine Commando Officer and diver who was awarded the Sword of Honour, Simon found that his time in the Marines satisfied both his desire for challenge and his fascination for explorers like Ernest Shackleton. After 11 years, he left, and since then, he's been coaching leaders in every industry and increasingly in sport. Supporting people like Alex Danson, who captained GB hockey to Olympic gold, working with Dave Brailsford at INEOS Cycling, and is currently on the training ground with Steve Borthwick and his coaches at England Rugby. He's also an active trustee of the Adaptive Grand Slam charity that trains and enables disabled adventurers in extreme expeditions. In our conversation, Simon shares what he learned from being given a can of beans and no opener, how his father, the rowing coach, helped him become a runner, and what he believes makes up an explorer mindset. Well, this is fun, Simon. Kicking off Season 2 with my business partner. What fun. Yeah, you don't sound that excited. So, Simon, we've worked together for now, I think, well over 15 years, I would say. But definitely 15 years plus in Coaching Impact. And most of your time is working with people, leaders, teams, often working in high challenge situations, be it from organizations to elite sport. But I want to focus today, certainly at the start of this conversation, with your own personal journey around pressure. So what has been your journey, your journey with pressure?
Something I've not really thought about before. So a very helpful question. Thank you, Sara. And if you're going to ask me later for an example of pressure, then this is it. I was very, very fortunate to grow up with my mum and dad, who were school teachers at a small but beautifully appointed school in Windsor. And the school had a fantastic community, lovely grounds, brilliant facilities, its own access to Windsor Great Park. And for the first 10 years of my life, I felt incredibly blessed to have looking back now, was a relatively pressure-free existence. I felt very grateful for that, partly because my mum's favourite saying is count your blessings. And so she was very good at reminding us to be grateful for whatever we had, whether that was food or company. And as I probed that a bit more, I can tell there were times when there was a little bit more stress in the system. But on the whole, in that first 10 years, we were super lucky. And then it came crashing down because the school decided it was going to close. And my forefather, who had defined himself effectively by his role in the school, was suddenly thrown into a situation where he fought to try and save the school but failed and was made redundant. The pressure or the extreme stress that I think I felt then was largely transmitted by him. unintentionally. He was a very kind man and always wanted to look after the family, but he could not disguise his fear, I think, and his disappointment. And that was solidified when we then ended up having to leave the beautiful, tiny little schoolhouse in the beautiful gardens, in the beautiful grounds, surrounded by a community who made us feel safe and who gave us so much fun. We ended up moving to an estate in Croydon, where the safe community was replaced, quite frankly, by roaming gangs of skinheads. And suddenly we went from feeling safe to scared. And so the two ingredients that I felt was, first of all, the disappointment of my dad, which made me feel very, very anxious. And then the literal scare of living in an estate, which was not lawless, but you didn't feel safe walking to the shops. And you could sometimes hear things going on at night. You thought, "Ooh, that doesn't sound very good." So that was my first experience.
Yeah, and there's a couple of things in there, actually, Simon, that I think are interesting. You said that you felt the pressure from your father, which this whole idea of the contagious notion of pressure is one. And also, I think you used the phrase because he lost something that had defined him.
Yes.
The role. And I think that's an interesting concept as well, isn't it? Around how we can all get caught up with our own definition of ourselves in relation to a role rather than in relation to who we are. So just out of that story, a young boy under 10 feeling the pressure of his father, the contagious element of that, and also this sense of, oh, but he's now feeling fearful because his role has gone.
I think it was more than his role, because the community was so strong that I was known as Mr. Scott's son, Simon, not Simon. And so he was the rowing master and had achieved phenomenal things with not just the rowing at the school, but the rowing nationally as well. And he lost that too, because you can only be part of the national system if you've got a school to train. And he'd lost the school in Croydon, for probably very obvious reasons, didn't have any rowing at all. Yeah. So he did get a job, but his identity had been taken away from him. So that made me, I know, since then, quite nervous about losing stuff. And because we'd gone from safe community to very, in my head anyway, very unsafe environment, I know that my immediate response, in fact, I was referred to by my parents quite often as timid and shy. Right. And that served me well in a friendly community. It served me even better in Croydon, where it meant I was pretty good at avoiding trouble. My identity at the time came from being a reasonable runner, because my dad, as a schoolmaster looking after rowing, used to ride his bicycle up and down the Thames while his schoolboy crew did their rowing training, and I would run alongside them. So I'd done more practice than everybody else by the time I got to 8, 10, 12, and that made me a reasonable runner. And that became, interestingly, the way I was defined. But apart from that, I was very much keen to stay out of everybody's attention. It's surprising to hear that I was shy and timid.
Very surprising, Frank, because I know you as an ex-Royal Marine. That's how I know you. That's
frankly what's made a massive difference.
Say more about that, Simon. Say more about that.
I was lonely and quite anxious during most of my teenage years. I was striving to think of something I could be quite good at and something I could be proud of myself at. And I remember, as a family, my parents were devout Catholics, so we would go to church every Sunday. And I remember standing behind somebody and I thought, bloody hell, he looks like he knows what he's about. And it transpired it was an ex-friend of mine from school who I thought at school was not up to much, to be frank. But he joined the army, and he was standing in front of us in the church, bolt upright, not like me, short hair, and I thought, wow. He turned around. I said, hello. And he said, hello. And I thought, wow, I want a bit of what you've got.
Okay.
And even though, frankly, I was not cut out to be in the military, I was not really cut out to go through all of the difficult training, I thought, that's a prize worth going for. So I dabbled. Luckily not, I didn't investigate too seriously because I'd known how hard it was going to be. I probably wouldn't have done it. But I dabbled and discovered that this is something I think I could have some fun with, and something I could be quite good at. So apart from the running, this was the first time I discovered something that I thought could be quite good at that. Mm-hmm. So that drew me into thinking I will experiment with the Royal Marines. I will see if I can get in. I did. I'll then see if I can stay for initial training, 10 weeks. I did just. I then thought, well, I'll stay for the next bit of training. I did just. And I thought, I'm beginning to really enjoy this now. And the reason I was really enjoying it was because, unbeknownst to me, but now I can look back and see it, I was being taught some phenomenal lessons about what we would call now choosing my mood. And it came from a lot of the sayings that we had planted on our heads. The only easy day is yesterday. And the no pain, no gain. When the going gets tough, the tough get going. And it was all, and I thought it was just chance talk. But now, having many years later been an instructor in the same place, I realized it's quite a deliberate way of helping people to really change their self-reference as they're going through the training. And so I was very, very lucky to chance upon the Marines, to somehow find the ability or the strength as a timid but shy person when I joined to stay the course, and through staying the course to actually feel like I was getting more confident. With that confidence came, I think, an inner strength and a completely new relationship with what we're calling in this podcast pressure.
Okay. What we found as a connection to why we now do what we do in a business together was, I'm the complete antithesis. I come from a performance arts background, ex-dancer, musician. Like, the arts are everything to me. But I think what was interesting about why we decided we could be useful together was actually, you set me the challenge here. You said, what is it that you think connects us in the work that we do? And write down one word. So we both wrote privately a word on a Post-it. We turned it over, and it was both performance. And my interpretation of performance was literally performing in the theatre as a dancer, but the element of actually what allows you to turn up and perform at your best. And your background was obviously performance in terms of huge extreme potential danger. But we found that there was some combination in terms of, I suppose, practices, we would now call them, that allow us to turn up our best when we need to, in whatever environment or context. So I'm curious to know, what is it that you did in that sort of training? And, you went from a timid boy, you sound like you became very determined and went into one section, and then you were determinedly going into the next section and determinedly. So you grew some real sense of confidence and inner determination. What is it that you remember really made the biggest difference? Take me to a moment when you thought, bloody hell, that works. That really has shifted something in me.
The training is taking you to your limit and just over it, so you can see how you react and learn how you react. And the brilliant thing is doing it with a bunch of other people.
Okay.
And it just takes one person. Again, we're back to the contagion point we raised earlier. Just takes one person to say, oh shit, this is awful, or to say, actually, God, flipping people. Well, come on, let's just show them that we're better than this. Or somebody even better comes up with a cheerful quip, I didn't really want to lift home anyway. We called them 4-tonner moments. So you'd you'd be out, you'd be cold, hungry, quite scared about what they were going to ask you to do next. And there was an increasing hope for this magical word index, which means, right, you can stop now pretending on the middle of Dartmoor that a foreign force has invaded, and you can actually get in your trucks and you can go back. And so they would tease us by saying, okay, guys, not long to go now. And you'd come out dawn and you'd see the 4-ton tracks and you'd all think, thank goodness, there they are. They're going to take us back to showers. We might even get some breakfast. Brilliant. And as you get down towards them, and nobody said index, so you're not quite sure what's going on, suddenly the 4-tonners just drive off. And then a couple of hours later, somebody will come in and say, you're still out there, you're still hiding in the edge of the woods, thinking, I've no idea now when this is going to end. Somebody will come out and say, it's good news, guys. We've got some breakfast for you. Everybody says, great breakfast. Okay, so organize yourselves so that you're still reasonably military. And they come and give everybody a can and say, right, remember, you're still on silent routine. So you can't, nobody's got a can opener. You can't use a stone or anything because you're on silent routine. So again, you think, oh, there's breakfast. Well, where's it go? So you get used to the fact that actually in those moments you can choose. It's much easier to choose as a group. Cheerfulness in adversity was completely brilliant, and that's why we often make a joke. But also, it was okay not to be okay, and realize that every so often somebody just needed to say, this, I can't say exactly what they said, but this does not feel okay to me right now. And then you just get round them and say, okay, come on, we can show them.
I think that's such an important thing you're sharing there, that when you think about the power of the group in that pressure moment. And I think a lot of the people we often work with, or I'm thinking even personal friends of mine who are in very difficult situations and they feel very alone. And what you're sharing there is that camaraderie, that sense of we're all in this together. We can lift each other up. We don't always have to be strong at the same time. We can take it in turns, because ultimately there's going to be somebody that's going to feel stronger than me at a particular time. And together we can hold it. Yeah. I think is so interesting and so powerful and so relevant to teams, actually, that we now work with, that whole sense of how do we deal with all of those? I mean, I'm thinking, as you were saying about, the vans turn up, the vans turn away, you're given a can, you can't get into it. I mean, that is very similar to a lot of the world that people are operating in right now, isn't it? You think something's going to happen, then it doesn't happen, or then you're blindsided by something that you hadn't expected, and all these things. But with the training that you've just described, there are some concrete, that idea that we're in this together and that you are lifting each other up and you're cheerful in adversity.
And you give people space when they don't want to be cheerful.
Yeah.
Which is something I've continued to learn in the civilian world. Because, again, in training, it's training. So what they're trying to do is say, okay, the harder we train you, the easy, there's a saying, train hard, fight easy. It doesn't work at all. But at least you feel you have got the ability to still make choices, however hard it is, and you also understand the importance of those choices. So in a real situation, when we were trying to rescue 2 servicemen who'd been stuck on a mountain in an uninhabited island in Antarctica, Brabant Island. One of them had a smashed leg because he'd fallen down a crevasse and a snow bridge had fallen on top of him. The other had got a very badly injured back. And the 2 of them had to be abandoned by their teammates because the teammates had to come and get help. So we were sent in to get them. And I remember we had an overland party, we had a helicopter party. I was leading from the helicopter party, and we just managed to get quite close to them on the mountain with a helicopter, and the weather closed in again, so the helicopter had to go, and we thought we were quite close, and then suddenly we could just see crevasse after crevasse between us and the tent. So again, without the 4-tonner training, we'd have thought, oh my God, we've had it. Instead, we're saying, great, come on, guys, how do we get across this? And Mac, who was my expert mountaineer, came up with a quip. And so we all had a bit of a laugh, even though, not
Yeah.
far up there's two people who we weren't even sure they were alive. But that cheerfulness then made us, I think, more resourceful at saying, okay, this is how we're going to get over this.
Yeah.
And it's almost refusing to be defeated by whatever's thrown at you. I actually think, having seen considerable amount of pressure, I've worked with teams in Ukraine as well at the moment, that the pressure that I'm describing is not as bad as the pressure that many, many other people are describing, because in most of the situations that I'm describing, there's an end point to it. There's a degree of support. You've got a degree of structure. So interminable pressure, completely unpredictable pressure. I think Ukraine's a great example where you've absolutely no idea what the end point is going to be. I think that is a very different pressure. However, having said that, and having been in pressure situations where people have been, shot very close to me, I also think that the two things I'd like to say. One is that pressure is pressure. Like you can't double the pressure when you get to your extreme. That's it. You're there. Now, some people then tip into pressure that actually destroys them, and I know quite a few people in that situation. And then you get the interminable pressure, which also destroys them. And I mean destroys in terms of mentally as well as physically, as well as, my brother died.
Yes. Yeah. There's the power, huh? There is the power.
The impact of call it what you like, dangerous pressure. The stuff I do and the stuff my clients face is a pressure where it's possible still to make choices. Yeah. But there's pressure out there where people can't make choices.
Yes. So what I'm hearing there, Simon, is that this level of perspective, getting a sense of what is pressure that actually just needs you to make a choice versus a pressure that actually is far worse than that, bigger than that, potentially takes you out of the world in one way or another. And that I'm hearing from you that, and, I witnessed this with you, right? You're very good when we're talking with the team and helping people get perspective. And I think now I'm really understanding through this conversation where that sense of perspective comes from for you. And it's difficult, isn't it? Because you're trying to judge that when you're working with people in organizations who are feeling hugely pressurized for various different things. And to have an irritating person like you and I, or somebody from the team saying, look, get a sense of perspective, that's not necessarily the most helpful thing to say at that moment, even though that may be absolutely the reality. So this idea that you're saying about it's okay to be not okay, actually, for a moment, or for however long you need to not be okay. But then there is a moment that actually all of us can make a choice.
Yeah, I think I'm distinguishing between lethal pressure, which isn't a very sensible thing to say, but lethal pressure, which I think you have to address in a very different way to the non-lethal pressure. Generally speaking, we're not dealing with potentially lethal pressure. We're dealing with non-lethal pressure. And lethal pressure you can make choices about. Lethal pressure, and I'll tell a story against myself on this, I thought the millennium bug might be a lethal pressure point. Right. And it was only when we moved house in 2004, 4 years afterwards, that I remembered all of the baked bean stashes that I'd hidden around the garden, just in case. So with lethal pressure, I think it's really important to listen to your body saying, or whatever it is, saying this could be a lethal moment. And as a result, I really need to just keep listening to this and thinking, what do I need to do? Sometimes you don't even have a chance to listen because your fast brains will have made you take evasive action. As a result of the journey I've been on, I've become fascinated in the people who survive in big disasters, and I love reading about that. And generally speaking, they're the people who are very good at, I think in my language anyway, deciding is this lethal or non-lethal pressure. And if it's lethal, I need to act now, and I need to be really decisive, and I need to recognize that this pressure is too great for me to fight against. I have to take evasive action. I have to ask for help. I have to do something. I'm a big fan, as you know, of trees,
Mm.
and I take great pleasure from growing a tiny little wood. And what's interesting is that those trees, I now understand, the ones that have survived thanks to their exposure to quite high winds here.
Mm.
And those high winds have actually made them stronger, developing something that we now know. The scientists tell us they've got a thing called stress wood. And when you grow trees and there's no wind, they grow faster, but they fall over because they don't develop the stress wood. However, some of my trees have snapped. Extending the metaphor, you can build the stress wood for the non-lethal storms, but if you have a lethal storm, then you probably need to do something a bit more serious than just rely on your inner strength.
Yeah. But I'm also hearing in there when I'm thinking now, around people that are burnt out, who have made themselves or have found themselves very ill as a consequence of pressure. What I'm hearing from what you're saying is it's being very alert to the first signs as well, bodily.
Absolutely.
Because if we override those, the body learns to override them too until such time when it actually takes you out.
I think there's two things about that. Well, one is I do think it's important, and every so often I'll help somebody to think, actually, how serious is this challenge, whether we call it pressure or not, or is this stress now moving into distress? There's different languages that we can use to talk about, I think. But what's really important to me is the external forces, a bit like the tree. Is this storm something I'm going to have to take really seriously? In which case, I make my choices based on the fact this storm's going to kill me if I don't do something sensible. Now, quite often, this is mixing my metaphors horribly, but quite often I meet people where the storm is internal rather than external. And I think that there are simple things that I learned to do in the Marines by osmosis, more than through instruction, to be honest, that helped me to think, before or as well as looking at the weather, I'm just thinking, what am I telling myself about the weather? Now, am I letting the weather boss me, or am I going to say, okay, it's raining? So I mentioned these long interminable exercises. We get cold, hungry, frightened. They're unpleasant places to be. And if it's raining, you can either think, oh, for God's sake, it's raining, or you can say, okay, it's raining. One means you have a horrible time. The other means you have a reasonable time, and you can have a joke about it. It's raining again.
I've mentioned stresswood previously in this podcast when I was talking to Sigga back in season 1, episode 19, if you want to take a look. That's when she said, sometimes you think this is unachievable and can't do it, but then you step in and it raises your performance significantly. That's the human equivalent of developing stresswood and prepares you better for similar challenges in the future. Also, I really like the distinction that Simon is making, that sometimes external pressure can be lethal. And sticking with the stresswood analogy, despite having the same external pressure of the winds and consequently developing stresswood, some of his trees still snapped. So yes, stress and pressure can help us develop our own stresswood and raise our game, as Sigga said. But the key is knowing when it's potentially lethal and you need to ask for extra support, because your internal resources alone just aren't enough and can develop into distress. This is very individual. What one person perceives as useful external pressure may well be seen by someone else as lethal pressure. That's why the question Simon asks is a great way to check in. Ask yourself, how serious is this? Is this stress now moving into distress? And here's the important bit. If it is, who or what can help me? The other point that interests me is learning to distinguish between external and internal storms. Asking ourselves, is this storm or pressure external or internal? I was curious about how Simon focused on this. When he shared how he asked himself that question, he first said, I learned to ask before looking at the storm. And then he checked himself and added, as well as looking at the storm. He asked himself, What am I telling myself about this external storm? Is he going to let himself be bossed by it? Or is he effectively choosing to tell himself something that helps regain some sort of control? The reason I like this subtle addition of "as well as" is that sometimes we just don't see that storm coming. However, when it does, we always have a choice in how we can respond. As Simon says, managing our internal response can create a reasonable experience instead of a horrible one.
I'm lucky now to work a lot with top level sport. For a while, as an individual coach to different people, now more as a coach to the people who train international sports people. And I've got to understand more and more of the science of what they call the rating of perceived effort. And the science suggests that actually it's not the physical pressure that makes you run out of endurance. It's your feeling of effort that makes you stop. And the rating of perceived effort is largely to do with the choices you make about how you describe what you're doing to yourself, or how you describe a situation to yourself, or and that's both what you say to yourself verbally as well as what you're saying to yourself non-verbally. Now, I hadn't got a clue that when they made me in the Marines stand up straight and march with a band, that was them helping me to realize you can be cold, you can be thinking, blast, this afternoon we're going on one of those horrible exercises, but when you're marching and there's some music, you feel good.
Yes.
So with your body, with your own talk, whether it's internal or external, frankly, you can reduce the rating of perceived effort. And it's been fascinating to, as I say, in sport, to see the science of that translated into marathon runners, into endurance athletes in all sorts of areas.
Yes, I'm absolutely sure that's true. And actually, funnily enough, when I had Daniel Priestley on the podcast a few months ago, he said, I witness people talk themselves into stress or talk themselves into pressure. Point. And I think that you're saying something very similar here in terms of what you say to yourself about the environmental or the external forces. But also you're saying something else, which I think is key, is just be in tune with your body and realize that actually you can, if you can't control your mind, you can at least control your body, and your body will then significantly influence your mind. So start with your body.
Yes. Yeah. Because whatever happens, that then means you make the choice rather than being bossed by the circumstances.
Yes.
Which is one of the things you learn operating against an agile, clever enemy is that your instinct and sometimes your intuition makes you very predictable. Operating in that situation, you always listen to your instinct and intuition, but you then stop and think, hang on a second, what are they going to think I'm going to do here? And so you then need to think game theory, as some people call it, but you then think. So again, all it does is it means you make the pause and think, actually, I need to assess the situation. I need to decide what I'm going to do about it. And again, decide what to do about it. It's quite important, because some people say, it's a phrase I quite like, but action is the antidote to anxiety. Well, anxiety is trying to get you to take action, so you need to be careful it's useful action, not just anxiety-induced action, because that's not helpful. It needs to be deliberate, choiceful action, I think. And again, looking back, that's what a lot of military training does for you. And you pick up lots of collective techniques that you can then use for your own personal benefits too.
Yes. Okay, that's great, because that segues nicely into how do you, so there's a couple of questions I'd like to ask you, Simon. I know for a fact that, and you mentioned it earlier on, that you work with lots of individuals in elite sport. I wonder if you could just share the example of Alex Danson, because I think there's something very specific in that actually is helpful in terms of all the principles you've just been talking about, because I think that's a situation when you share it, where something shifted for her. There was a life choice that she had to make. And we often work with people who are feeling victim to a circumstance, or victim to something that has
happened to them. I think there's something very powerful in Alex's story, or the work that you did with Alex and Alex's ability to shift her story, that could be very helpful to anyone listening to this.
So Alex Danson is a brilliant hockey player. I think the most caps, still over 300 caps, over 100 goals at time of recording in Paris with the GB team as one of their advisors. Alex still was captain of the GB women's hockey team. Kane was on holiday with her fiance and laughing at one of his jokes, threw her head back and hit her head against a concrete wall. To cut a long story short, that rendered her almost incapable of movement, of tolerating light, of tolerating. She lost all her independence. And what was remarkable about Alex, and luckily her fiance was part of this, her family were part of this, so we're back to the group support element, was that Alex insisted on maintaining the belief, and she turned this into her own mantra, which her husband, I know now husband, used to say to her every time they were together, was, Alex, you will get better. Alex, you are getting better. Alex, you will take more from this injury than it takes from you. And that was Alex making a choice. Now, there are some days when literally Alex couldn't move off the sofa, and she developed with her sister, Claire, another phrase, which I've used already today because I like it so much, which is, it's okay not to be okay.
Yeah.
So today, I'm just going to have it's okay not to be okay day.
Yeah.
Because some days you just can't push through this sort of stuff.
No.
But if you think you can push through, then let's see. Yesterday, I walked to the edge of the patio. Tomorrow, I'm going to try and walk to that tree and back again. And then again, one of the fantastic things that Alex did over and over again was she counted up. So instead of focusing on the stuff she couldn't do, she focused on what she was now able to do that she couldn't do yesterday, which is something we called counting up. Yes. Again, my mum would have called that counting your blessings. You've got a choice. You can either look at what you've lost, or you can look at what you can do today that you couldn't do yesterday.
Yeah, I love this notion of counting up. I think that's what I did when I gave birth, consciously thinking this contraction is one closer to giving birth. So however painful the contraction was, it was one closer to the delivery, And that really, really helped me, actually.
The other part of Alex's story that I love is that when she eventually was well enough to at least visit her team, and I think this is on the web somewhere, she super smartly sat down and wrote them all a letter to say, I'm really excited to see you, but I need to let you know how you can help me in this visit. And it effectively laid out the things they could do that would be helpful to her, and the things that might happen that she needed them to know. So if, for example, I go quiet, it's probably because my head is hurting, not because I'm losing interest. And if I move away, it's because the light's too bright. Again, I like that a lot as an example of people who are in difficult situations. Actually, it's quite hard for people who aren't in difficult situations to help them unless the people in difficult situations are clear about what they need. And I think that extends to most humans, to be honest. I think we all have a slight over-reliance on other people remembering what we need, when actually I personally think part of managing pressure is also owning what you need and making polite requests of other people to help me reduce the rating of the perceived effort here. Yeah, I would like you to give me more encouragement, or if you're going to give me some suggestions, please explain how they're going to help me go faster, or whatever it might be.
Yes.
The Alex conversation was really interesting, because what that was really was an extension of the CNA story, which was, how do you help a group to make some choices in a high pressure moment. And people may remember that CNA, around about the millennium, when I was hiding baked beans in my garden, were sadly the owners decided that they needed to close the stores. And they decided that in May. They had to tell everybody in June, and it came with a request: please will you trade CNA UK until next January, because we've got a lot of stock and the best time to sell the stock is at Christmas. And so we had 148 managers shut in a large hotel room, and we first of all told them the news. They were immediately, obviously, very concerned. That was a massive pressure moment for all of them.
Yeah.
Massive, partly personally, but several of them were immediately very anxious for their teams too.
Yes.
And I guess, in summary, what we offered to them after they'd had time to talk it out, and there was quite a lot of anger and blurting, we moved them to a choice and said, okay, based on everything else that's going on here, the only thing we can really control here is how we choose to be in this moment. Mm-hmm. And we said, not my suggestion, somebody far cleverer than me, said, the choice here is we can either choose to be bitter about this, or we can choose to use this moment to get better. It was remarkable. At that moment, about 148 people, back to the power of the group, said, let's choose to use this as a moment to get better. Now, I like the story because is that lethal pressure? No, but did it feel like lethal pressure? Yes.
Yes.
However, the group, the 140 of them, by having a bit of time to blurt and then thinking, okay, we can make a choice here, that group actually together chose to create what became known at the following January. It was, in fact, in December, it was written up by the Times as Goodbye, Goodbye, using B-U-Y and B-Y-E, and it was described as the best possible close of a high street store. Customers, when researched, said, we'd come back, we'd love to come back. We've enjoyed the last 6 months more than any other time with this store. Partly the prices, I think. The family were pleased because actually the store took far more money than they were expecting. And 71% of the people we surveyed said actually they had really used the last 6 months to move on to a better job. And so people who felt they were consigned to being sales assistants for the rest of their lives actually thought, this is my chance to make a choice. And they chose to be, some joined the police, some became teaching assistants, some became nurses. So it was a moment of choice. Yeah. And so that's the Alex individual, which I personally enjoy helping organizations when they now face these moments of challenge and pressure, which feels lethal. But first of all, let's recognize it's not lethal. So let's make sure we do acknowledge it's horrible. So speak about it, but then also think about the choices that you still have some control over. And then we can help you to plan way of moving on.
Yeah.
As opposed to just moving away.
Yeah. Horrible, not lethal. That's quite a nice distinction, isn't it? Or useful distinction. Horrible, not lethal.
It has been for me ever since the Marines, yes. And that's what I stopped thinking, not lethal. So
just horrible.
What do I want to do about it? What do I want to do about it?
Yeah. So just on you, Simon, how do you recover? Because what you're describing here does take cognitive effort, right? To make a choice does take some energy to make a choice. So what have you been absolutely deliberate about in terms of your own sense of well-being and recovery to enable you to not only deal with your own horrible moments, we'll call them, but also be supportive and useful to the many people that you and I and the business work with when they feel they're in these sorts of moments? So
counting up is super important to me, counting my blessings. You know, I hear my mum most days saying, count your blessings. And I know that's called all sorts of different things these days, but fundamentally, it's useful to stop every so often and think, wow, how lucky am I? What have I got today? Yeah. I keep a scrapbook. a physical scrapbook with mementos of things that make me feel great about being me, frankly. I don't have a mistakes book, just a scrapbook of my achievements. So I think that's really important. I also have a future scrapbook in terms of what are the things that I'm moving towards. A lot of them are personal and family, but quite a few of them are to do with helping leaders to develop in ways that makes a massive difference to lots of people in a way that we build a world that's fit for my grandchildren. I haven't got any grandchildren yet, but if I did have, not happy about the state of the world at the moment.
Yeah.
So having those two is really important. But on a day-to-day basis, I think I am a massive fan, as you know, of disciplined routines, rituals, as some people call them. So I have a morning ritual in terms of exercise.
What is your shed ritual?
Swim or I run. And as I get older, I have increased more strength training in that too.
Yeah.
Freestanding training. So that's I always do at least half an hour every morning of one of those activities. I also, every evening, if I'm at home, go for a walk in my wood. And I take massive pleasure from the wood, which is now, some of the trees are over 50 feet tall, even though I planted them when they were 6 or 7 feet tall, literally 19 years ago now. So, and the wood changes every day, changes every year. And I know there's a lot of research, which I don't understand, into forest bathing, but I get such a lot of pleasure. So I know my happy place and I make sure I build time to go there.
Yeah.
I have my track of the week too, one for pepping me up and one for slowing me down. And quite often those will be 5 minutes. I'll try and make them 4 or 5 minutes long. And in that 4 or 5 minutes, I give myself permission to just enjoy the music. And I might stand somewhere and look at a view, or I might go more to one of the trees. But that music is completely me time. And then the final thing that I'd offer for this is that it's going to sound awful, but I'm very, very deliberate about who I spend my time with. I spend my time with people who give me energy, and I'm very reluctant to spend any time with people who take away my energy. Some people think they're taking away my energy, but because I think I can help them, I get far more energy than I lose. So I'm very, very blessed to enjoy working with people who are very, on the whole, very grateful. And the people who are not very grateful generally don't call me back. So that's
and actually, yes, I'm sure that's true.
Recovery is a plan. It's something I call it recharge. It's interesting in the Marines. Again, you have this thing called R&R. It's a Navy thing, I think, whereby sailors on board ships, they recognise you can't just work hard all the time. So you were given these rest and recovery, and recuperation sessions where they go off and they do a hobby on their ship. They'd be sail making, they'd be drinking grog or whatever it might be. But again, even way back. A captain of a ship realized that if you push your crew relentlessly without creating these R&R spaces, then they break down eventually.
Yes.
I'm very concerned about people. You mentioned burnout earlier. I think that's the relentless pressure which becomes lethal because of its relentless nature.
Yeah, I agree. And also, I mean, what I'm conscious of thinking about when you say that is the responsibility of the group around that person. How often we support as in tribes and as teams in organizations can offer so much collective support to people who are not taking enough recharge or recovery. But I'm sadly, I don't see enough of that group responsibility. We've got something in our team, haven't we, Simon, where we will say, shed off.
Yeah.
Because we can see it, because the other person can't. I love that because it's, in a way, it's fun.
Yes.
It's a fun, light thing to say, but underneath that, there's a serious request in a way.
Yes, I completely agree. Or if we're all, on the same off-sites, then we'll get up and go for a run in the morning.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, but again, the group thing is massive. I think, yeah. Whether that's the five-a-side club on Tuesday nights or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The team
Someone
commitment.
said the other day that the biggest pandemic is loneliness, and
It absolutely is.
I get that.
Yes.
And that's that form of pressure and stress, whatever we want to call it. That's awful. I don't know how you can apply the simple techniques that I'm talking about to that, because I'm sure that is lethal.
Yeah.
Time.
Yes.
Oh, there are so many practical offers in the stories that Simon's sharing in this conversation. I'm just going to pause for a minute and highlight a few of them. There are a couple from Alex's personal story that stand out for me. Firstly, the power of her mantra, "I'm going to take more from this than it will take from me." This isn't the first time I've heard Simon quote this, and personally I find these words extremely useful if I'm getting overwhelmed with the pressure, or if I'm feeling I'm losing touch with my own ability to choose. Secondly, I loved hearing about the letter that Alex wrote to her teammates to help them understand how she might behave when she met them for the first time after her accident. It's such a great proactive way of reducing any possible internal storm, as Simon calls them, asking for what she wants in advance and not relying on any assumptions. If you took a moment right now and asked yourself honestly which relationship or situation would benefit from you clearly asking for what you want, I bet you could find one. And finally, Simon's great point that recovery has to be a plan. This is very important and way too often is left to chance. Increasingly, we must be intentional and deliberate about our own recovery. Plan it. Creating rituals or routines can really, really help. Mason Curry wrote a fascinating book, well worth reading by the way, where he describes the daily routines of all sorts of famous writers, scientists and artists. The fact is we can all create our own daily rituals. Simon's recharge and recovery rituals are running or swimming, listening to his chosen tracks of the week, and spending time in his happy place, with the trees in his wood.
Simon, thank you. It's so lovely to do a deep dive on your personal journey. If there was someone listening, or indeed watching this, who wants to be better under pressure, and it's important to make that distinction, because I think you said earlier on, there's no pain, no gain. And I think some of the times when we talk about the podcast or talk about the phrase better under pressure, I'm often challenged by saying, well, what do you mean we have to have more? What do you mean? Are you basically promoting the pain? And I'm not saying that. We're not saying this through this podcast, but what we are saying, I think, and where you and I and the team align, is that we can achieve some incredible things when we just take that little incremental push on ourselves and be enlivened by it, and sometimes realize that we can do things that actually we thought we couldn't. And your example of where you were at 10 and where you were after going through those experiences as a Royal Marine, shows that, you kept getting more and more confident because, I can do that. I can do that. So what two things would you pay forward? If you had to choose two to anyone listening to this, what two would you say are two really powerful ones?
So I haven't mentioned this phrase before, but I think it's a useful catch-all. I personally find it super useful to think of myself as Simon the Explorer. I don't expect I was the first one ever to use it, but I've really developed a phrase with you around explorer mindset. And what I think I'm trying to help explain in this conversation is that is something you can grow.
Yep. And
you grow it by taking yourself, as you just said, just beyond your points of comfort to start with. And actually, as you get stronger, I think I like the word stronger. I don't mean physical stronger. I mean stronger in all aspects. As you get stronger, I think I personally and other people I work with take more and more pleasure from the pain of pushing themselves even deeper into the discomfort. And so growth mindset is a fantastic thing, but I actually think the world now needs explorer mindset. And the difference is that explorers go out into the unknown. They know they're going to take on scary situations, but they relish those scary situations, and they value the discovery as much as, if not sometimes more than, the destination. And I like doing that. I like putting myself now in really difficult, non-lethal but scary situations, where I think, blimey, this is a test, and I might sit in the car park before I go into a certain situation which might be quite high profile and high stakes and big expectations of me, and I'll sit in the car park and think, what the bloody hell did I agree to do this for? And then I think, no, I chose to do this because I really want to test myself. So explorer mindset would be my first one. You can develop it. I think I've tried to help explain with the right application of some of the stuff we've talked about, but balanced with the recovery too. So that would be my first one. And then the second one is cheeky because there's 3 parts to it, which is, and I'm going to use a prop. I know not everybody can see the prop, but I'm holding up a bottle of TCP.
You are.
So TCP, it says on the bottle, soothes pain and fights infection. And the point of TCP is that if we're not careful, if we don't apply something fairly quickly, then pressure gets worse because we haven't chosen how we're going to respond to it. So TCP stands for 3 things that I think Alex's story demonstrated very well. When we encounter pressure, or when we begin to feel pressure building, it's really useful to talk to ourselves and to other people about it. That might initially start as just a blurt. It might start as, ain't it awful? It might start as, it's okay not to be okay. But fairly quickly, I think the explorer mindset says, yeah, listen to yourself talking about that, but then choose. And I've offered 2 choices today. One is this lethal, non-lethal? I think it's an important choice, because then based on it probably being non-lethal, frankly, then you can say, okay, how do I choose to use this moment to move forward? And then you can move to the P and say, okay, I'm going to have a plan now. And it's a plan, not an action, because if you get into action when you're under pressure, that's sometimes reactionary to the pressure, as opposed to you thinking, no, what do I want to move towards?
Yeah.
And so explorer mindset with a bottle of TCP.
Fabulous. Yes. Love it. It's so interesting for me just sitting and listening and hearing these stories, because it reinforces so much, I think, of what you and I have always been quite interested in exploring, literally exploring together. And yeah, really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Me too. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Better Under Pressure with me, Sara Milne Rowe. If you enjoyed it, please do subscribe and let us know what you found useful or what you'd like to know more about. And don't forget, if you'd like to sign up for our fortnightly Pressure Points newsletter, where I summarise key points from each conversation, you can find a link at saramilnerowe.com. If you're interested in any of the practices mentioned, check out my book, The Shed Method. Alternatively, you can find us at Coaching Impact or me on LinkedIn and Instagram. Better Under Pressure was produced by the fab team at Smart Cookie Media. Thanks so much for listening, and until next time, goodbye.